Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Parvis Khansari, and I'll be chairing today's seminar. I would like to welcome all delegates participating in this morning's session. We've got a great lineup of people from across the highways sector, and I hope you all enjoy this webinar. We will be recording this event, and it will be available to delegates. The event will also be replayed on Hoppins at 6:30 this evening. This is the third in a series of 3 webinars. The first event, Decarbonising the highway sector. The second one was about learning further about decarbonisation. We learned some techniques and standards for measuring and reducing carbon in maintenance and selection of materials. As you all know, 13 out of 14 local authority members of Southwest Highways Alliance have declared a climate emergency, with all the member authorities setting ambitious targets to reduce carbon production. Our program board was keen to set up a work program around the topic of decarbonisation, prompting the call for a second conference exploring this topic. Originally, it was due to be held as a conference last year, but as you know, because of COVID, it's been postponed twice, and now it's being run as 3 webinars. I'd like to say a big thank you to Atkins for sponsoring the event, even in its virtual form. We've got a great selection of speakers taking part in today's session, covering a diverse range of topics within the overall theme of decarbonisation of the highway sector. There will be presentations from Matt Eglinton from the Department of Transport, Ken Rogers, who's the co-founder of Treeconomics, and Jack Bauer from Central Bedfordshire Council. We'll then have a little break and questions and answers. You can also get a cup of coffee at that point. I hope you keep putting your questions in the comments box, and we will be discussing them with the speakers afterwards. After that, we'll have Barry Thompson from Alpha 311, Kate Petty from Plant Life, Kate, and finally Dr. Neil Jennings from Imperial College will be talking to us about climate emergency. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over now to the first speaker, who's going to talk to us about central government's thinking on innovation and resilience in highways maintenance. So, Matt, may I hand it over to you? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Parvis. Much appreciated. And good morning, everyone. So yes, Matt Eglinton, Head of Local Roads Maintenance, Innovation and Resilience for the Department of Transport. I think I'll just quickly start off by saying, yeah, it's been I think since I originally accepted this invitation, there's been a lot of changes happened in the department. And I guess I just wanted to kind of get, because it is still relatively fresh, the news. Just a quick tribute to my colleague Steve Berry, predecessor in this role, who much loved and very, very influential in kind of local roads maintenance, and was a big driver in all things kind of innovation across the highway sector, especially tying in with the resilience of this as well. So just wanted to obviously flag that, and taken a lot of his work on, and still got some of the colleagues who formed an invaluable part of Steve's team, such as Gary, Paul, and Gordon, which is obviously a good shout out for them, because they're and we've also got new colleagues such as Mark McGarty, who started on with me, looking at kind of data and innovation within the local road sector. So thanks so much, and without further ado, I'll crack on with my my presentation, which is Future of the Street. What does a decarbonised world look like? And I guess,
Matt, sorry to interrupt you. Your slides aren't on screen.
Oh, I'm so sorry. The share went. I'm so sorry, guys. Apologies. Can you see them now? Sorry all. Is that better? Yeah, okay, perfect, excellent. Sorry about that, first time using this system. So yes, Future of the Street, what does a decarbonised world look like? I guess in some of the positive bits, we're already kind of we're getting there already. I think the kind of good news at the moment in terms of the carbon cutting agenda, and the UK is leading the way in terms of decarbonising our economy, and are area faster than any country in the G20 since 2000. And as you would have seen with the 6th carbon budget announced earlier this year, as part of our the UK government's been committed to being carbon neutral by 2050, setting up that kind of net zero approach. It's been backed up by several kind of aspects, such as the kind of industrial decarbonisation strategy, which was published in March 2021. And the 6th carbon budget kind of takes that step even further by limiting volume of greenhouse gases over a 5-year period between 2033 to 37, which will help us get the UK to achieve that kind of goal of 75% reaching net zero by 2050. I mean, one of the the big things that I've seen in terms of the stat that always kind of jumps out is in terms of the decarbonisation in general, about where kind of energy kind of comes from. And only 9 years ago, a large portion came from coal, and now it's less than 2%. With the kind of real drive through with kind of renewables, wind and solar. And then, from a more kind of transport perspective, looking at phasing out the coal power completely by 2024. So obviously, and then the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030 as well. So I guess in some respects, the future is already here to some respect. But there's obviously so much that we can be doing to crack down and move towards net zero by 2050. And I guess why? I mean, this is always the good bit about kind of speaking first, because you can always set out the kind of the overarching agenda and whatnot for for decarbonisation from a national and which then filters down to a local level. And of course, this is all being kind of driven towards COP26, the Conference of the Parties session, which takes place in Glasgow in November. So a lot of teams within central government, teams within DFT, BEIS, and being coordinated by the Cabinet Office, who are working towards delivering an excellent kind of showcase for COP26, with obviously the 4 kind of major kind of strategic drivers about limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Enabling communities and natural habitats, which again, they're very focused on kind of the local level, which is great about how the impacts of climate change do affect and how should be kind of ready for them. Mobilising climate finance, I guess, finding green ways of climate generation, and of course, I think the main thing, especially from my perspective, is the working together, the real collaboration. And it's groups such as the Highways Alliance here and all partners here as well, working together, sharing best practice across a whole suite of areas, from just roads in specifically, but in and around the network and broader, to ensure that kind of that local solutions can be kind of delivered for obviously benefits of everyone who lives in them. And I just wanted to kind of flag the speech. So Alok Sharma is president for COP26. And I just love the quote that he so obviously a lot of trailing, and just saying, in preparing for the speech, I asked my daughters what message I should give the world leaders about their priorities, and their response was simple: please tell them to pick the planet. And I think that's a really nice kind of message. And so yes, there's a lot of work taking place at a national level to ensure that we can deliver and demonstrate exactly what we're doing to the world stage, and again passing on that kind of best practice to other parties. And of course, going back to the whole when this was supposed to be taking place, I thought that from the announcement back in March 2020, we would have a bit more to say on this. But I guess this is a good opportunity to kind of highlight, I guess, from our transport perspective in terms of the future decarbonisation, and just to kind of highlight again what our Secretary of State is obviously very keen on. Ministers are all very keen on tackling the decarbonisation challenge. Apologies. Transport decarbonisation is a huge kind of the carbon emissions from transport is a huge factor, and of course that's equating from the transport industry, vehicles, and of course construction and maintenance and building of transport infrastructure in the first place. So this strategy, when it will be released, I good knowledge that it should be in summer this year. But I think why it's big is because of the scale of importance of this. and also it's the biggest piece of work that HMG have ever done to tackle greenhouse gases, from the transport sector. So I'm just closing it. Sorry, these messages keep coming up. I'm just closing my. Yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, so we've taken a very kind of cross-modal approach in this, and when this comes out, we're kind of holding on with bated breath at the moment to see when this strategy gets pulled out. Is under wraps, but like I said, it is it should be very impressive, and will be a kind of definitely a meter stick to kind of measure in terms of how to kind of tackle the decarbonisation agenda. And I guess for me, in terms of the streets, from the plan being announced last year, the two kind of big focus for me, in terms of local roads and working quite closely with MHCLG around local areas and local communities about reinforcing the message that it is these solutions need to be led by people such as yourselves in local authorities and planning energy systems, planning of route networks, to meet the decarbonisation costs targets at the least cost. And it's finding out the specifics of why emissions occur at specific locations, and there's no one size fits all for these, and only through local management will kind of these solutions be found which are the most effective for the communities, and of course by abolition the network as well. And so there's lots of work taking place through obviously all the active travel, moving towards finding low carbon solutions for a lot of things, and moving traffic away, and also through the traffic team in terms of. But you have seen recently the announcement about traffic signals maintenance, all this kind of stuff that feeds into ensuring that traffic can move around, reduce congestion as well, and ensuring that decarbonisation can be approached from all angles. It's net zero, and the sixth carbon budget was very kind of clear in terms of rather than just a reduction, this is moving away to net emissions by 2050. So I guess from the mentioning of the title of my presentation, I guess the point is that there is no one solution to what a local area, local road, or street will look like in terms of the guise of decarbonisation. But there are several different kind of routes, which I know from taking a bit of research, different local authorities in the Highways Alliance, are taking full advantage on and moving very at pace with in terms of tackling the decarbonisation challenge. Moving from things such as planting and biodiversity, all about the kind of key design around the local area. I note I was having a look at some of the different initiatives at different local authorities, and I flagged Dorset Council's rewilding and the grass and the verges around wildflowers, which I thought was again, these things are excellent kind of examples of where the sheer range of where decarbonisation can occur. The grass verges one has been something that the MHCLG have been really keen on as well, and again by working with them, presenting the kind of the transport perspective, trying to provide good, I guess general guidance through the kind of national design guide that published by MHCLG, and how these things can be delivered within local areas and communities. Picking up on a lot of the aspects around it's again, there's no one solution or several specific solutions. It's all about kind of how these things interact and how the effective kind of joined up planning around these different aspects is key. And with the decarbonisation also links into for local roads specifically is goes hand in hand with resilience as well. Resilience of our local networks, ensuring that networks can respond as quickly as possible to challenges and changes such as from climate change and also traffic. And it's really here where I feel a bit kind of, I guess it's I guess spoon, not sort of teaching to suck eggs here, because local authorities already are doing a lot of good stuff in this area. From our incentive element, which I'm very pleased. Thank you very much for filling in the extra information on sustainability. From our assessment from it, we know that 4/5 of local authorities have already declared a climate emergency, and an overwhelming amount of authorities have also undertaken research into carbon reduction, which is becoming more apparent, and we are seeing this on our road network already. And and by focusing on different solutions, by working together, and we want people to be communicating as much as possible through different groups such as the Highways Alliance, LCRIG, and ADEPT as well. All these different stakeholder bodies which can provide tried and tested solutions which we can then roll out. There's no point all forging ahead and trying to find over 100 different ways of doing stuff. If we can find things that have worked for specific local authorities, we want to make sure that can be rolled out, can be scalable. And so highlighting some of the innovations which colleagues and have been suitably engaged with, especially with kind of low carbon initiatives around the local road network, such as Tower Hamlets rubber road using recycled rubber asphalt from tyres. Some of our kind of live lab stuff, which I'll deep dive down into a minute, around kind of using graphene to sustain the network, to make those networks more sustainable, and also to for the materials to last longer, hence not having to go out, because even maintenance and repair are essential. All these things have a carbon cost in terms of bringing the men out and the workforce out, and vehicles to obviously repair and relay the network. As part of our other live labs, Cumbria and Doncaster also looking at recycled plastics in asphalt binder, and then as part of the kind of resilience work in terms of linking these bits up, keeping our networks kind of moving, ensuring that they can operate as well as possible, and reducing kind of congestion. A lot of the tree planting to mitigate the effects of flooding, because trees, as well as adding to that, stripping out carbon from the atmosphere, also can be used as a natural flood barrier. And so there's a lot of these different kind of pilots and trials taking place to ensure where strategic use of these should have multiple benefits for the local area at large. So I mean, just one of the examples that we're working with, as a couple of years ago, we sponsored the ADEPT Live Labs, providing nearly £300 million, and there's a lot of this work has been extended to November 2021, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, there's a lot of learning coming out of this at the moment, and a lot of really good best practice, which we are making sure that as one of the requirements of the programs, to make all this readily available and accessible by ADEPT and its partners, to ensure that any kind of best practice, any kind of learning is being taking place and driven down, so it is scalable, and so these things can be passed across to different local authorities. As you know, there's multiple different sites around the country that were successful. Unfortunately, none in the southwest. But if there are any more of these initiatives, then I very much hope that we can get some some more good investment down in the southwest. But just to highlight, last week we went to the West Midlands for their Resilient Network live lab, looking at kind of traffic and being very much very responsive to traffic and congestion and accidents, to ensure that traffic is moving, again reducing congestion, and again tackling decarbonisation indirectly from vehicle emissions. And some of the other aspects, whilst none of them are specifically on decarbonisation, I think that part of it is that there's a whole wide range of different initiatives that we can do that have a good and indirect benefits for decarbonising the local road network. And so looking at for instance Bedfordshire, looking at a whole range of different kind of low energy generation solutions. Suffolk, looking at smart technology capabilities along all their lighting columns, using adaptive street lighting. And Buckinghamshire have a whole range of different initiatives at place, again, which will help with the decarb agenda. ministers have been really keen on these kind of things, and like I said, we had Rachel out last week, and Bernadette just before the pandemic hit, visiting Buckinghamshire to see the smart mobility stuff there, and also it's a lot of the good work that's kind of taking place. But we know that it's not just this. All local authorities are doing their part, and we'll just urge that this continues and that communication carries on in a big way. And finally, there are obviously different funding streams from government which are kind of helping to achieve the kind of the green agenda and decarbonisation, such as MHCLG's Welcome Back Fund and the Future High Streets Fund, which are obviously helping in terms of designing our high streets and redesigning them in the wake of the pandemic, and also in the focusing on actually how can they be designed again to capture some of these overarching decarb objectives. And of course, the funding from DFT specifically, such as the Cycling and Walking Fund and the Extra Travel Fund, looking at integrating, again, going back to the whole bit about designing in, ensuring that people are aware and that these kind of low carbon solutions do work for all. And then through the funding that my team are responsible for, the money that goes from the integrated transport block that feeds into local transport plans and maintenance funding. Again, looking towards spending review 2021 to make the case. Say, look, this is about having sufficient levels of investments to ensure that local authorities can deliver green and have the funding in place to make sure that kind of green solutions can be implemented effectively. Thanks so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for squeezing in huge amount of work that's going on in a short presentation. If I could ask you to stay with us, and we'll come back to you later on with questions. If I invite those attending the seminar to put your questions, any questions you may have, in the comments column, and we will discuss them with the speakers later on. Right, I'd like to now invite Kenton Rogers, who's a co-founder of Treeconomics, to tell us if trees have a role to play in decarbonising the highway. Over to you, Kenton. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Parvis. And yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm just getting my screen share set up now. Okie dokie. So, hello, I'm Kenton Rogers, co-founder and CEO of Treeconomics, and way back, my background was in more traditional forestry, and following on from that, urban forestry, which is where trees meet people. And Treeconomics is an employee-owned social enterprise. We work across the UK and beyond on lots of different projects, and our goal really is to help tree managers, urban planners, landscape architects, developers, highways technicians, anyone who will have us really, to provide sustainable treescapes for everyone. And to do this, we work on a lot of collaborative stuff, working on management tools, methods and solutions. And today I'm going to be focusing on the work we've done in relation to highways, to look at trees and the highway to zero carbon. So essentially what we're about is highlighting the value and benefits of trees, because we know trees are vital in creating better places for people to live and work and play. They provide over 20 distinct ecosystem services or benefits or public goods or whatever they're being called at the moment. But crucially, trees are able to provide all of these things all at the same time and in a very cost-effective way. So as well as just looking nice, which is what they're normally appreciated for, they clean our air, they increase property prices, reduce the urban heat island effect, provide cultural links to the past, and improve our mental health and well-being. And these benefits are magnified in our towns and cities and along highways, because that's where most of us live. They really are at the forefront in our fight against climate change. And one of the things to point out here, of course, in this infographic is that the the highway is very much at the forefront here. You know, that they're a major part of our lives and a major part of the urban fabric. So just to look at some other benefits before we get into carbon with regards to trees, more specific to the highways. So trees are very good at filtering air pollution, trapping it on their leaf surfaces and on the bark. And although individually it might not seem like a large effect, actually across the whole of London, the trees filter 14% of all the SOx, NOx and ROx emissions from vehicles, which is quite a substantial and significant amount. Although I need to caveat that because poorly planned trees can indeed trap pollution and make localized issues worse. But of course that can be managed out with thinning or removing some of the trees to let the air circulate through. So it's an easy effect to counter. Put up this little infographic here because the importance of shrubs and hedges cannot be underestimated here either, because they've got a massive surface area and of course they're at the right level to capture exhaust emissions, whereas trees, often that's the level where they've got their trunks, and so a lot of that exhaust and particulate matter can actually be transmitted through to the other side of the highway. Trees can also increase the lifespan of asphalt. So Dr. Howard Robinson, Chief Executive of the Road Surface Treatments Association, says most roads in the UK that experience a reasonable amount of traffic will start softening at 50 degrees Celsius or centigrade. Now that might seem quite high, but that's the heat at road level. So actually in the atmosphere, and the heat we experience may only be around 26 degrees. And trees over roads can actually increase the lifespan of asphalt by around 15%. And it can also reduce fatigue on pavements as well. And actually it's a nice place to sit in the shade and keep your motorbike or your cars cool. This example here is from Malmö in Sweden. And what's great about this is actually, you know, the design that was drawn, the trees actually do look like that design, because unfortunately we don't always get it right, but there's a tree here that isn't storing any carbon and certainly isn't providing any shade either. But at least there was a tree, I guess. Trees also reduce noise, and although originally this was thought to be an insignificant effect, but that was a study that was done in 1976, and it used tree foliage in a wind tunnel experiment. There's been more recent research in Denmark, I think, which was Van Rengetherm, produced his paper in 2014, and he took the whole tree into account and looked at the soil and the trunks of the trees and found that when you do that, the effect is significant, and belts with just 15 meters wide can significantly reduce the noise from a road, but also the low-level frequency noise as well that gets caught up in the soil and the leaf mulch and the trunks of the trees. So these are just some of the benefits. Here's an example of how that can be increased, that noise effect, doing things like having a random assortment of tree sizes and trunk sizes, and not having standard rows either. So of course there's many other benefits to trees: biomass production, biofuel, mulch, timber, wind regulation, carbon storage and sequestration, of course, water quality improvement, flood risk, soil retention and visual amenity. But there's still a challenge, because given all that, we still find that urban forests and street trees are, on the whole, they're an overlooked and undervalued resource. 36 million urban street trees are lost every single year in the US alone. That's USDA statistics. And just to put that into context, there's only around 8 million trees in the entirety of Greater London's urban forests. And of course, this is at a time when more and more of us are moving into towns and cities, projected to be around 70% by 2050. But of course, in the UK, we're already well over that, around 80%. So despite the importance of trees and the fact that all the benefits are generally acknowledged, 67 of urban forests in the UK have no proactive management whatsoever, and that's a great shame, and it means that we end up with scenes like this. And these trees are not going to provide any of those benefits because they're dying or dead, and they're not going to store carbon. And on the whole, we as an industry, and I don't just mean highways, I mean actually arboricultural professionals as well, we've not been doing a very good job of increasing tree canopy cover because we haven't really been planting and maintaining existing trees to the best effect. All too often trees are badly planted with no aftercare and no maintenance, no long-term maintenance provision that allows them to achieve independence in the landscape. So even when successfully established, they're often ignored or neglected. So why aren't we investing in healthy trees? Trees that can actually grow to maturity and fulfill the requirements that were asked of them when they were designed in? Well, it's quite frankly because we do not value them. And unless we can value them in a meaningful way, and yes, that normally means money, we're not going to be able to demonstrate to decision makers how the costs of putting in decent trees outweighs the benefits. And it is difficult because we know all the costs, but we can't yet value all of the benefits trees provide. But of course, carbon is one that we can value. And it's only when we start looking at it in this kind of way that we can move from creating spaces and places like this to places like this. This is in the UK. This is up in near Peterborough, and real thought has been given here to the infrastructure. And all this has gone in before any of the development, so the trees can start to establish. And you've got a public walkway, then that's separated by a wild flower strip, which you can't quite see in this picture, to the cycleway. Then you've got the trees, then you've got the road, and then you've got another row of trees, and then on the other side you've got another cycleway and another footpath. And these trees are going to be looked after until they achieve independence in the landscape before they're going to be handed back to the local authority, which is fantastic. So how can we get better trees planted? And it does come down to this justifying the expense of putting them in correctly in the first place, I think. We did a bit of work with friends at Green Blue Urban. So like I said, a lot of our projects collaborative, and we did a street tree cost benefit analysis. This report is freely available to download and in hard copy. And just as a bit of background, what we were finding is, take for example London, a lot of London plane. It's the most one of the most populous tree species. So 29% of trees in London Victoria Business Improvement District are London plane. It's the most populous tree. It's also very popular in New York and Paris as well, actually. However, although it's only 30% of the population, it's providing 60% of those benefits or public goods or carbon storage. Yet when we look at what's been planted since London plane, remembering London plane's been around a long time, planted by the Victorians and Edwardians around 200 years ago. Since that time, if you look at the other tree species there that have been planted since, they're all small stature species in the main. They're not going to live as long, and they're not going to attain as big a size as the London plane. And that's a problem for the future because we're going to lose those benefits for ecosystem services because the London plane achieves a big canopy and a large biomass, which can store carbon, of course. So back to the Green Blue Urban Street Tree Cost Benefit Analysis, we worked on a concept that was drawn up by an arboriculturalist called Jeremy Barrell. And if you look at the chart on the top there, he said, if we plant trees and keep them till they get mature and have big canopies, we're going to actualize a lot of benefits. But what actually happens is that some money is saved to begin with, inverted commas, and trees are planted in small 1 meter pits and they die and they're replaced. So you end up in a cycle of repeating this and the benefits aren't actualized. So that was his hunch, that was his concept. And we wanted to put the facts and figures behind that. So we took a whole load of data from thousands of London plane trees across London, because we had a lot of that data. We ran it through a tool, collaborating with Forest Research, and the tool's called iTree. It's a US tool, but we've adapted that for the UK, and it's been around now since 2011 for UK use. It's freely available and open source, so anyone can use it, which is great, and it's peer reviewed. So we ran the data through that to give us the benefits that the trees were providing, what we could measure at least, which was the air pollution removal, the attenuated runoff, and the carbon storage and sequestration. We then worked with a government economist to give it a net present value. So there's a lot of data here. Data's essential. Makes a boring slide, but the knack, I guess, is to turn the data into useful information and then action. And this is what we came up with in the report, was a cost profile for urban trees. So you can see on the left, we've got the street tree that's replaced at least 4 times in those 50 years because it keeps dying, because it hasn't got space to grow. And over the 50-year period, that tree will have actually cost you £12,000. However, the tree that's planted properly with available root volume underneath the street or in a park, and a tree that can actually grow to a decent size, at the end of those 50 years, that tree will have paid you back nearly £3,000. It doesn't seem a lot, but remember, of course, we factored in all of the costs, but we've only managed to factor in 3 of the benefits. And actually, one of the main ones of those, of course, is the carbon sequestered. We also looked at a break-even point as well. So again, for a tree that needs to be replaced all the time, that's just going to keep accumulating costs. That's the graph at the top there. They steadily rise, whilst not accumulating much benefit at all. Whereas a tree that is planted properly will break even at around year 30. Of course, one of the key things you can do to store carbon and is to retain your existing trees, because it's already there. That's what the Victorians did for us. It's in the bank. And this is where our data disagreed with the concept, because those London plane trees, even after 200 years, those benefits are still accruing. And I looked into this in a bit more depth, and it's just that, you know, these are long-lived trees, and it's not topped out yet, although it will eventually. This is the oldest London plane tree in the UK. It was planted in 1680, and it's still growing. It's still got extension growth on it like this, which shows really good vigor, and it shows no sign of declining just yet. Here it was at the turn of the century, and here's a 1,000-year-old London plane tree, bit of a veteran, but still providing some public good. So solutions, I think what we need to look at is getting that data and turning it into useful information. And the data is out there, and a lot of it is free and open source. So urban forest managers and highways technicians, landscape architects and others can actually draw on that and use it to make the case for planting bigger stature trees that are going to live longer. This is just an example of some of the work we did with Highways England, formerly Highways Agency. Again, another collaborative project that we did. And we looked at measuring the structure and composition of their soft state, and then using that data to inform management. So on the left, we see an example of air pollution removal that can be measured using local monitoring stations and inputting the tree data. And that can be broken down month by month, pollutant by pollutant, and tree species by tree species. On the right is the assessment of tree health. And one of the key things to draw on here is the ash, of course. There's a ash dieback disease. It's been around for a few years now. And a lot of the ash are in a poor, critical condition because of this. So what will the impacts be? So now this can start to be managed. So out of a total estimate of 303,000 trees, ash are around 17%. There's about 50,000 of them. If you had to go out and replant them all, that would cost around £14 million replacement cost. We can also see there that they're storing a lot of carbon. 17.9% of the carbon stored in Area 1's highways network on their soft estate is from ash. And on the graph on the right, we can project that steady decline from ash dieback over the next 30 years. So this can be start to be managed and look at, well, okay, we've got to plant some more trees to make sure we remain carbon neutral, and hopefully go into carbon positive through tree planting as well. And that can be done using a tool called iTree Design. And you can pick trees on the fly, as it were, on an online computer program, choose the different species, plant them on a map, and it will give you the benefits projected over the design life, the whole life, which is around 60 years, and the cumulative 100 years, which is where we've topped off the tree life. So you can just use it for planning, and then you can calculate your cost benefit analysis as well. So if you're putting in some infrastructure, you can take that out of the equation and then put in the trees you're going to plant, and then you can see whether you're going to have no net loss of biodiversity or whether you need to plant some more trees. New tools as well are in development, and this one looks more at incorporating the biodiversity metric as well. So you do your post and pre-habitat and distinctiveness and quality. So you get your biodiversity units as well as getting your accumulated costs and your accumulated benefits for any projects on all the different landscape habitat types. So I know we're going to hear about wildflowers later as well, because they're also important, and amenity grasses. So they're all in there because, you know, it's where we've got that mix as well. We can't tree everywhere. We need to think about things holistically too. Finally, then, from the sophistication of new tools, we've worked with Berkshire, who are the largest containerized tree nursery in Europe. And we've done something here where all of their trees now have been given an EPC rating, a carbon performance certificate. And this is to help people when they're buying trees and selecting trees and specifying trees, think about, if they can, choosing bigger trees that will store more carbon and will be longer lived. And I know smaller trees have their place, but I think there's been a tendency to overuse them in recent years. And this is really about thinking about getting in those bigger, longer lived, larger canopy trees that are going to leave a lasting legacy for our children, really, so that we can leave that legacy very much like the Victorians and Edwardians left for us that we're enjoying today. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found that interesting. And I'd also like to thank Kia as well, because they're the people we've done most of our highways work with today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kenton. And please stay around for questions later on. I invite delegates to put questions in the comments box again. And I'm sure there'll be questions about what highways engineers think about the roots of the trees and what it does to the structures. But without further delays, over to Jack Boyers from Central Bedfordshire, and he's going to tell us how streets can produce energy instead of just consuming them. Over to you, Jack. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Parvis. Thanks for having me on today. I'm excited to talk to everyone about our trial that we're doing with Power Roads, which is using energy from the road surface to actually help with our winter maintenance and actually power our highways depot. So I'll get started. Before I actually go into the Power Road, I thought it'd just be a good opportunity to talk about Central Bedfordshire Council and our sort of background with climate change and sustainability. As a local authority, we aim to lead by example in our sort of everyday practices. We try to encourage and support our residents and businesses to do likewise with tackling climate change. Following a lengthy consultation process with staff and residents, businesses and our councillors back in September last year, we actually adopted a sustainability plan, and this plan outlines our steps that we will use to hopefully become carbon neutral by 2030. The plan is essentially a roadmap of what officers and councillors can do and how we can invest in sustainability and encourage others to do the same. And we try to lead by example, as I said. We've got smart meters in all our buildings now. We've got solar panels on 16 council-owned buildings, including our main offices and our depots. And yeah, the things we've put in place already, we hope can reduce our council's carbon footprint by 154 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. And that brings me on to highways, where I work as part of the highway service. Our service actually can play a really big part in helping the council reduce its carbon use. We're constantly looking at new ways of working to reduce carbon. And here's a selection of some of our best practice that we're already using and our innovation. Just last year, we installed a rainwater harvesting tank at our depot, which essentially just uses excess rainfall that comes off of our depot roof, and it stores this water, and we actually use that to mix concrete. We use it for cleaning our vehicles, cleaning our signs, and it's just a really simple but effective way to reduce using excess water. We also use this water for gritting as well, where we mix our salt with a water and brine solution, and that again reduces the amount of salt that we need to use. And finally, picture on the right, you can see that we've actually converted all of our inspectors' vans over to electric vehicles now. So that's and that works really well, and that's massive for the council, and it shows just little steps that we're doing to try and become more sensible with sustainability. And that brings me on to our Power Road innovation, which I'll be focusing on today. Our Power Road trial is actually one of 3 trials we're doing as part of the ADEPT Smart Places Live Labs programme. We're one of 22 local authorities who were granted funding from the Department for Transport as part of this project. And there's some really exciting work going on as part of the ADEPT Live Lab programme. And we actually chose to split our funding into 3 renewable energy schemes. So the first scheme that has been completed is our kinetic trial. We've worked with a company called PaveGen, where we've installed a footway which uses kinetic energy from people's footsteps to actually power nearby street furniture. So we've got this installed at Leighton Buzzard train station, where we use that the energy from people's footsteps to actually power a lighting and a smart bench where people can charge their phones. So that's been quite a big hit. One of our other trials is, again, on the solar theme. We'll be trialing a solar road service at our depot, which will use solar energy to power the actual depot itself. Unlike our other panels we have across the authority, these panels will actually be on the road surface and you can drive over them. So that should be quite interesting as that progresses. But like I say, we're here today to talk about Power Road, which is our thermal trial. We're working in partnership with Eurovia, and they've installed this at our highways depot, and I'll be going into further detail on this trial over the next sort of 10 minutes or so. So Power Road is created by Eurovia and has devised a new function for roads to produce heat energy. This development basically allows roads to capture the sun's heat energy. This can be stored underground and then distributed to nearby buildings or for the road surface when it's needed. If it can work, I'm hoping we can just watch a short video to sort of show what Eurovia is all about. Cool, thank you. Go back to the presentation. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, so you can see the short video gives a little overview of what Power Road can do and what it's about. But actually looking at how it works, as you can see on this picture, that's one of the installations, not at our depot, but somewhere else. It just shows what it looks like under the road surface. But so how it works is the first step of the process is that there's a fluid in the rods, those orange rods on the screen under the road surface. These rods and the fluid, they heat up and capture energy from the surface of the road. So the hotter the day, the more energy is captured. This energy is then transferred underground. In our case, it's transferred 150 meters underground through these geothermal probes, where it can then be stored, and the energy itself is actually kept for several months underground where it's warmer. And then once the heat energy is needed, in our case, that's when temperatures fall below 0 degrees, then the energy is then transferred up through these probes and it heats the rods under the road surface to prevent snow or ice. So effectively it acts as like an underfloor heating for your actual road surface. On our trial, any excess energy can actually be used for other purposes. In our case, the extra energy will actually heat up our depot, which is really, really cool. So this is sort of a little diagram of how it looks. As you can see on the diagram on the left, you've got these rods under the road surface. And then in our case, you'll have geothermal probes that go far into the ground, and that's where the energy is stored. And then you can also see that once the tarmac and the road surface is reinstalled, it looks and works just like a normal road, and no one would really know what's going on underneath with the technology. So it's, yeah, a really interesting trial. And then looking at Power Road in central Bedfordshire, there are a number of sites across Europe that use Power Road, but as far as I'm still aware, our depot in central Bedfordshire is the first site like this in the UK. We actually installed this back in March 2021. There were a few minor delays in terms of the installation, mainly due to the British weather. And the delays sort of came around those geothermic probes where we had to drill 150 meters into the ground. The soil on our depot site is quite hard, so it took quite a lot of effort to actually get them that far into the ground. But overall, our project team and our contractors said that it was actually quite a straightforward thing to install, and not as hard as they sort of thought it would be. We've also got this sort of state-of-the-art power room. We can use that to have control of when we use the energy, but the really interesting thing with Power Road is that it's all automated, so we have to do very little once it's installed. There's sensors in the rods that will tell us when the temperatures have actually dropped below 0, and that's when it just kicks in straight away and will heat up the road. So like I say, it's all automated and there's very little that we have to do. And there are 2 ways in which this technology can work for us. We can use it in the winter to reduce the need to grit, and in the summer to power the actual highways depot. So I'll talk about it now, how we will be using it in winter. So obviously we only installed it at the end of March, so we've not been able to have a full winter maintenance season to see how it actually works, but we are really excited coming up to the next winter to see how successful this can be. As I said earlier, the technology works when the temperature drops below 0, and then the underground probes, they sort of they kick in. The energy is kept warm below the surface of the road. When it's below zero, it brings that to the road surface, and then it heats up the road, and it will either stop ice and snow forming or melt any ice or snow that there is. I've been told that the power road that we've got can actually melt up to 20 centimeters of snow per day, so should be quite effective for us in the winter. So like I said, it effectively just acts as an underfloor heating and will negate the need for us to grip. If the trial is successful and it's something that could be rolled out, there'd obviously be huge environmental benefits to this technology. We'd be able to use less salt, less water, less petrol on our gritters, because we wouldn't have to grit certain roads, less emissions from our gritters and so on. And there'd be obviously cost benefits with that as well. So although it's a trial, it's something that we're really excited to see how it can develop. And like I say, in the summer, it can be used to actually store the energy and then heat our building as well as winter. So that's how it will work for us, and we're hoping that there's going to be massive environmental benefits to that. As that video showed earlier, it's not just for roads, there's lots of other ways to use it, and this little graphic here just shows some of the other ways that they're sort of using it on the continent. In France and Czech Republic, this technology is used on public structures such as swimming pools. So instead of using the energy to actually heat the road surface, they use the energy to heat swimming pools, and it's something that we could see rolling out into council leisure centres and things like that. On a similar theme to how we are using it in winter, the energy may also be used to remove snow and ice from roads and airport runways. It's something that airports might look at using in the future, and again, there's massive environmental benefits with that. And for us, we're already looking internally at other ways we can use this technology elsewhere, and one of those are things like car parks and school playgrounds, will just again lower how much we need to salt. So there's lots of ways that we could use Power Road, and although it's early days for us with the trial only just being installed in March, we're really excited about the future benefits. I think that pretty much covers everything. If there's anything you want answered, please just drop a question and I'll be happy to come back to you.
Right. Thank you very much, Jack. That was very interesting, and I, for one, have been keeping an eye on the progress of your live lab experiment. Right, so that brings us to the end of the first three presentations. Unfortunately, Matt has had to leave us. He's been called into a meeting. If I can just ask Kenton perhaps to join us by, that's brilliant. I've got a few questions which I'll present to you. The first one I think was aimed at Matt, but I'll open it up to either Jack or Kenton. It's regarding, what is in your opinion the biggest challenge in decarbonising the transport in UK? Is it, do you think, skills? Is it the resource? Is it politics? And in my question is it the public culture when it comes to producing emissions? Any comments on that? Any of you wish to take that on? Kenton?
I'll make a start. It's not my area of expertise, but I think change is probably the biggest thing to try and manage for everyone, because a lot of people don't like change, full stop, and I think we need to collaborate more as well, and it's not just about trees, and it's not just about carbon. It's about using lots of different strategies to do that. So I really like Jack's presentation, by the way. New innovative approaches and a multi-pronged approach to it is what's needed. And I think the biggest challenge is silo thinking as well. Whereas departments don't talk to each other always. And I think we're getting out of that. I think one of the things with coronavirus and all these Zoom meetings we all seem to be having is there's a lot more conversation and a lot more well, events like this, really, where people can network and share ideas. I think I've said enough now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sort of agree with that. Actually, I think to tackle this issue, no one's going to do it alone. I think we've got to join up, work together, and that's one of the really good benefits on the ADEPT project, is that these 22 local authorities are working closely together, sharing ideas, and the idea of that is to make any information easily accessible for people wanting to use this technology in future. So yeah, I think I think working together is going to be a massive way to get out of this, and really trying to take people with us as we look to make changes.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Next question, I think, is for Kenton. How do we get highways engineers to love trees, given that they're concerned about overhanging the highway, routes forming trip hazards in the footway, route ingression into drainage system, road safety issues with both the trees and leaf falls? Kenton.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's going to take time, I think, but key to it is there's two issues trees have, I think. There's one that they've got a long time horizon. So when you look at design cycles being 30 years and whole cycles around 60 years for designed grey infrastructure, and most trees only coming to maturity at around 90 years, there's a longer time horizon to factor in. And then the next point goes back to my presentation, really, about valuing and being able to put in that cost benefit analysis for trees to justify that initial investment, really, in creating the spaces for them. So what was quite cool about that slide I showed up in around Peterborough was that all the trees had gone in first and all the root space was connected under the ground, and then the development went in after, and so that space for the trees wasn't impinged upon. Obviously that's a new build, so you can do that. Retrofitting is really difficult, and you know, this, especially in London, the underground services, there's so many of them, and you know, we might not be able to get trees everywhere, and yeah, but if you're going to have trees, make them count, I suppose.
Thanks very much, Kenton. Thank you. And then I'll move on to the next question, which is for Jack. Presumably the Power Road trial is going to consider the issues of how installing in existing highways will have problems with existing subsurface assets, i.e. stats utilities, and avoiding damage, etc. And my supplementary question myself is, are you looking at costs and how you can reduce the cost of that initial outlay?
Yeah, exactly that. Actually, that's a good question, Paul. That's something I missed out on the presentation. That is the biggest challenge of Power Road, actually, in terms of making it more scalable and rolling it out to other people. Is for us in our trial, it caused the biggest headache was having to. We did it on the road that we've already got at our depot, so we've actually had to sort of dig up all the road and then drill the holes and then resurface. So actually the costs associated with that were higher than what it would be if you put it into a new development. So when I said in my presentation that we're looking at doing it at schools, I think that would be for new schools. If we're building a new school, then we'll put it in right at the beginning of the project. I think that's the way this technology needs to be used. It needs to be used at the start of a project rather than retrofitting, because it's going to be really difficult, especially if you wanted to put it into busier areas, like you say, Paul, where you're going to have stats and things like that. There, the costs would be so high that it wouldn't actually outweigh the benefits, if you like. So the biggest learning we've had so far is actually, I think you need to use this technology at the start of a development or start of a project. So maybe for a new housing development, it would work there and on those roads. So I don't think it's going to be something where you dig up your whole network and then put this technology in, but it's certainly something as we move forward we can use. I think yeah, that's definitely been the biggest challenge.
Well, thank you for that. And we're all, as I said, watching the progress of your trial. I've got one more question for Kenton. Kenton, there's a huge amount of information on use of trees in urban settings and in place shaping, etc. Do you think there is enough? Do you think there's a need for a new national standard for use of trees to sort of unify our approach to better design?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of guidance out there already, but I know the new trees in development is being talked about being redrafted, the British standard, so that would be good, because there's been a lot of advances in tree science or arboriculture in the last 10, 20 years, and there's really good resources from the Trees Design Action Group as well, so I can put a link up to their tree species selection guide, and they've also got a new document out, I think it was just this last month gone, on trees in planning as well, and they've also got a document on trees in hard landscapes, which is all about managing and collaborating and getting trees in to what is a very difficult place for them to be sort of inserted, and then to get them to thrive as well, which is the difficult bit.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. That brings us to the end of our questions. I'd like to thank Kenton and Jack and Matt, who's not with us at the moment. Thank you all very much for your presentations. Very interesting subjects, and very, very good to hear from you. So we're going to have a little break now. The next speaker will be on in about 9 minutes at 11:45. If you'd like to have a rest, get yourself a cup of coffee, and we'll see each other in a few minutes' time. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Right. So, welcome back to the second part of this morning's seminar. I'd like to invite our next speaker. You heard about the Power Road. Now you're going to hear from Barry Thompson, who's the Chief Executive of Alpha 311, who will present a different look at how roads can generate power. Over to you, Barry. Thank you.
Thanks, Parvis. Good morning, everybody. As the slide says, my name is Barry Thompson. I'm the Chief Executive of Alpha 311. Alpha 311 has been going for around 3 years this year. And we started the project asking ourselves a rather simple question. Given the amount of roadways that we have and the issues that we see with wind technology not being welcome, for the most part, around our towns and cities, we looked to the roads to see if there was a more unique solution and one that could be retrofitted. Now, there's been many studies around the world with regards to the introduction of wind turbines on roadways. For the most part, they tend to be to the side, and they also are usually rather large. But what we thought we would do is take a look at how we could use our existing infrastructure with regards to providing a renewable energy source. So what we've come up with is the Alpha 311 vertical axis wind turbine. The turbine is unique in that it has no central shaft. As such, the energy generation unit at the base of the turbine is a frameless brushless permanent magnetic alternator. It too has a huge hole in the middle of it, which allows us to retrofit it onto existing lighting columns. This allows us to utilize the infrastructure that's already there, the columns, the cabling, the distribution cabinets. The turbine itself is incredibly light. One version of it is a carbon fiber version. The prototypes that we have are around 650 mil wide, by about 750 mil tall. They weigh, the blade assembly unit, the rotation part, weighs only 3.5 kilograms. This allows airflow passing either side of the turbine to help generate energy. It doesn't need to be facing into the wind, and it also doesn't need electricity to start it up and generating. So to put that into sort of context, in Highways England currently manages, this is 2016's figures, 170,000 lighting columns. The county councils manage 2 million of them. But in total, there are over 7 million lighting columns in England alone, so without the rest of the home nations. There's the opportunity to produce up to 13 gigawatt hours of electricity every day just from the lighting columns that we have on our highways. Now, obviously, not every lighting column is suitable. In order to install the turbines, we need to take the header unit off of the lighting column in order to fit the turbine at the correct height so that it can get the benefit of the traffic that passes. And that's key. So it's a short form turbine. It's not huge. It doesn't overhang. But when placed in the central reservation, it becomes highly efficient. Our initial case studies looked very close to home here. I'm in Wiltshire in Kent, my partner's in Faversham. So we took a look at the A299. Now this road runs from Faversham all the way to Margate. But the section in particular I'm interested in is from a place called Brindley Corner. It's a large roundabout at the junction of the M2. And that goes all the way to Manston Airport. Every single stretch of that road is or has lighting columns. just over 1,100 lighting columns to be exact. The road is just over 16 miles long, and that's quite significant. So around 22 kilometres long. It's a 70 mile an hour dual carriageway, 2 lanes, with a 3.5 metre central reservation or median. The road itself services Herne Bay and Whitstable, and the lighting columns stop just before Manston Airport. Over 33,000 vehicles per day use this road, and when Operation Brock isn't in place, that can be in excess of 17,000 eastbound and 16,000 westbound. So it's quite a heavy use A road, managed by Kent County Council. So those 1,100 lighting columns all have header units that can be removed, replaced, and we would be able to install turbines on every single one. Now, the key here is not necessarily the size of our turbines, but the speed of the road. The studies that have been done to date have taken a look at what effect vehicles passing a turbine would have when placed in the middle of the highway or the median of the highway. Obviously, anybody that's been stood by a road as a truck or a bus has come past, or even sometimes a speeding car, has felt the impact of the airflow that's being displaced by a vehicle as it's moving forwards. This is waste energy. It's not slowing the vehicle down. You don't slow the vehicle down. In fact, you feel that airflow impact upon you after the vehicle has gone. So here we have a couple of examples. So a small saloon, a Honda Civic type style car, traveling at 50 miles an hour, displaces air at 5.4 meters per second, which is about 12 miles per hour. As the vehicle increases in size, as does the amount of air that is displaced, with a large HGV at 60 miles per hour, displacing at 8.2 meters per second. This is rather turbulent air, so it's you can often see the effect of that if you're ever following behind a HGV on the roadway, and you can see how that impacts the trees at the side of the road. But it's not so much about just the speed of these vehicles. Wind turbines inherently have needed over the years to get bigger. So if you double the size of a wind turbine, the power that can be generated from that is doubled. So double the size, double the power output. And as we've seen over the years, the turbines are getting larger and larger, and an 850-foot tall horizontal axis wind turbine that we're seeing nowadays, and China's building slightly bigger, is necessary because of the length of the blades. Now, the reason for this is that the rating of the turbine is determined by the swept area, so the tips or the circumference of those blades. So, of course, the longer the blade, the taller the tower has to be. Our turbines work in a different way. So we look at the impact that this airspeed has on the wind turbine. Air passing either side of the turbine causes it to rotate, but air is volume. So a vehicle traveling at 5.4 meters per second northbound, plus a vehicle traveling at the same speed and being the same size, traveling southbound, now doubles the speed impacting the turbine, causing it to rotate faster. At 5.4 meters per second, we see an average of around 200 RPM on the turbines. If you're doubling the speed impacting the turbine, you'll now have the opportunity to convert more of that energy into electricity. But by doing so, you do so by a factor of 8 because air is volume. more electricity can be generated by this dual aspect. This is quite hard to test, as we're finding, because there's no wind tunnel on the planet that can blow air in in opposite directions at the same time. So we're working with some clever people at the University of Connecticut who are effectively building a dual aspect wind turbine. The benefits of this are that this turbine can also produce much more efficiently electricity at lower wind speeds, making it very suitable for urban environments. Coupled with the fact that each turbine is made of carbon fiber, and we are testing other materials as well. I'll come on to that in a second. Low vehicle speeds will still produce electricity. Obviously, not at the full size that they would do at between 50 and 70 miles per hour, but they would still produce electricity nonetheless. So it's one thing to have a design, and we do have prototypes. I have a thermoplastic prototype just over my shoulder here. And we've been testing for the best part of a year and a half. So we know the electrical outputs that we can get. But we asked the head of thermofluids at Leeds University to do an analysis of how much electricity could one of our turbines produce when placed in the medium of a highway, giving him all of the data with regards to height, speed, air speeds being produced by vehicles as they go past. And with a number of caveats, one of which being that according to government statistics, there is no traffic on the roads between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. in the morning, if you count every single road in the UK, including my little cul-de-sac here. But with that caveat, that we would still be comparable to 20 square meters of solar per turbine. Now, that's around 6 kilowatt hours of electricity per day. So add in the fact that, between 10 and 7 in the morning is another 9 hours. We're actually closer to 9.4 kilowatt hours per day. Where that's key is that the stretch of road, the A299 between Bedfordshire and Manston Airport, and that 16-mile stretch would be able to produce in excess of 9 megawatts of electricity per day for a 16-mile stretch of road. Over the course of a year, that's a saving of around 3,000 tons of carbon. You're powering the streetlight. You're able to utilize the existing cabling and transmit that electrical energy locally into the local grid, providing a cheaper source of electricity to local demand. The business model we came up for this is called energy as a service. We don't sell electricity. There's no PPAs. There's no massive fixed term over 25 years where the equipment generates less, but the price of electricity goes up. The lease is to enable the local municipality to have a secondary revenue stream. It de-risks the solution, but increases profitability. This fixed fee means that individual deals can be done with utility companies, or it can be utilized locally. When we are providing local energy generation, and that's being utilized for charging points, for schools, for municipal buildings, for example, then the cost savings alone, regardless of the carbon reduction, the physical cost associated with this is phenomenal. We own the turbines as a company, which means that we maintain them. If they fail for any reason, we will swap them out and put in the latest version. We don't do a like for like, it's always the latest version. where we are right now is we have our first units going on to the O2 Arena next month, with a number of units going out to New York shortly afterwards. And we're in conversation with a number of local and county councils with regards to trials later on this year and into next year to start putting turbines into the central reservation of highways. That's a very brief overview. I know my time is swiftly coming to an end of the Alpha 311 turbine. More can be found at our website, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, Barry, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you for that. If you don't mind, if you can stay with us, we will take all the questions at the end of the presentations. That would be great. Very interesting. And I'd like to invite Kate Petty from Plant Life to talk about wildflowers in verges. I can tell you, Kate, I will be listening very carefully because there's an enormous amount of interest in our local politicians in wildlife at the moment, wildflowers. So before I ask you to start, just to mention, Kate cannot be with us after her presentation. So she's kindly offered that if anybody wants to contact her with any questions, she would be very happy to answer afterwards. Over to you, Kate.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Parvis. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. There we are. Yes, so I'm Dr. Kate Petty. I'm the Road Veg Campaign Manager at Plant Life. For those of you who don't know, Plant Life is a charity that's dedicated to conserving the UK's wild plants and fungi. And as part of my role, I work with councils and highways agencies, contractors, and everything down to local volunteer groups. Anybody really who wants to do something to encourage wildflower verges and to make management more wildlife friendly. And the focus today, of course, is looking at wildflower verges from the point of view of what they can do to help us reduce carbon as well. So Plant Life started the Road Veg campaign back in 2013, really in response to verges being mown down in full flower. A lot of the work of the campaign has been to raise awareness of these really important habitats, and more on that in a minute, and also to change perceptions of what verges can be, which is a lot more than just neglected thickets or litter strewn areas by the sides of our roads. And there are sort of two things that are essential to the campaign. We started a petition asking councils to change, and this has generated a lot of media interest, which you might have seen sort of on BBC News and in The Guardian and The Telegraph and some other news outlets. And then we also have the advice and guidance that we provide as well. So why on earth am I here talking about verges? Why do wildflowers and verges matter? Well, over 700 species of wildflowers can be found on our verges, and that's nearly 45% of the total flora, the total wildflowers that we have in the country. And as we like to say at Plant Life, where the wildflowers lead, wildlife follows. And that's really to say that verges not only sustain such high levels of plants, but they also sustain huge amounts of other biodiversity. So your bees and bugs, bats, birds and butterflies, everything can all rely on these wonderful wildflowers and the grassland habitats that they form. And when you think we've lost over 97% of our meadows in this country since the 1930s, so what might initially look like just little bits of grassland by the sides of our roads really are a vital refuge for so many species. So they really have so much value from the biodiversity side of things. And as we've heard today, when we heard from Kenton about the trees, there's often a focus on biodiversity and the benefits that trees and grasslands can provide in this sense. And sometimes that is the focus, and arguably rightly so, but it's also, of course, important to recognise the wealth of other benefits that verges and wildflowers can provide. and often we talk about this in terms of ecosystem services or the natural capital of verges. They can act as buffers for noise and air pollution. They can act as pollinator corridors. They can enhance local character and bring a pop of colour to our verges, which can really help to enhance those connections with nature and help to improve well-being. But key and key to this talk and the topic of discussion today is they can also lock in carbon to the verge, sequester carbon down into the soil. So they have real benefits when it comes to tackling not only the ecological emergency that we find ourselves in, but the climate crisis as well. So it's important to think about wildflower verges as one thing in a toolkit of lots of different approaches that councils and highways agencies might be able to use as part of their policies towards tackling the climate emergency. The problem is with verges is a really pretty tough situation has been created for verges over many years through increased mowing and a change in mowing practices, either verges being cut too often or completely neglected, and also the increases in nitrogen emissions, plus budget cuts that people have been facing too. So often verges have come, and the wildlife aspect of that has come at the bottom of the pile. And Plant Life really have started working on this to put forward a new vision for verges where they're managed with nature in mind, and in order to help management become more sustainable and more efficient. So making verges much more biodiverse, but also using them in terms to lock carbon into the verges and also reduce the cutting and therefore reduce the emissions from excess grass cutting as well, whilst keeping verges safe, but bringing back this lovely sort of riot of colour back to our road verges as well. And in order to really see that transformation be realised on the road network, we've put together different guidance which sets out the practical ways that this approach, a different approach to management, can be implemented. One which will not only transform small pockets of verges, but will in time sort of transform the whole network, making it rich in biodiversity and making management regimes more sustainable and more cost efficient. And whether that's looking at it in terms of what we can do a bit differently to change, to manage the resources of the soft estate a bit differently, or whether that's thinking a bit differently in terms of designing new road verges and how we might manage them. So we have the two guides available. The first of those is the Good Verge Guide. This has more of a sort of community focus and a local council focus as a sort of go-to guide for transforming verges into wildlife havens. And then we have our technical best practice guide, which was launched back in 2019, which seems an age ago already. And that was in partnership with the National Highways agencies, Highways England, Transport Wales, and Transport Scotland. We also had Kier and Skanska, as they were working with us on this, and also fellow NGOs as well. And this sort of sets out all of the technical detail, sort of different approaches or things to think about when it comes to managing grassland verges in particular. So I'm going to give you sort of a very brief overview of sort of 3 key principles when it comes to creating grassland verges and things that you might want to think about in terms of changing the management of your existing soft estate, but also then how you can start to plan a bit differently when you're creating new verges to make them more wildlife friendly and also to really improve those benefits when it comes to reducing the amount of carbon that we have to spend in or use in terms of cutting or in terms of how much can be locked into the verge as well. So there's often, I think, a conception that verges, when we talk about them being wildlife friendly, that means never cutting them again and just leaving them to go wild. And that can make some people quite apprehensive about what change might look like. but actually for a grassland, you actually want to manage it to keep it in the best condition, not only for a best condition that will bring those biodiversity benefits, the richness of plants and all the wildlife, but also that will help the grassland and the soil lock in more carbon. So in terms of what good management looks like, that means sort of annual management. So studies of meadow management has shown that no cutting and cutting too much can both cause problems for species-rich grassland and the wildflowers that grow in it. And with regular management, the thicker, coarser grasses can dominate and quickly become the thugs of the verge, which actually makes it more difficult to manage, having to cut more often, which is not what we want if we're trying to reduce the amount of carbon. So the sort of the sweet spot really is managing at least once a year, but ideally sort of twice a year to get all the benefits from that. And then the second thing that's key is the timing of that cut. And really this is around letting the flowers, it might seem very obvious, but to grow, flower and set seed before the mown. And that's really working with nature, allowing the seed set, which will then be regeneration in future years. So by cutting too early or too frequently or too late or not at all, you quickly get rid of many of the species that can be really beneficial to grasslands. And also the sort of, this again mimics meadow management and brings lots of benefits in that way. So that's the sort of the second out of the three key principles. And then the third one, which there's been lots of interest in, and probably the trickiest thing to start to bring into management is moving grass cuttings. So why is this so important? This really is because low soil fertility is a really key thing when it comes to improving the wildlife value, and also to reduce the management burden. So working towards reducing the number of times we have to cut, and therefore the sort of reducing the amount of carbon that there might be from going out there and cutting the grass and having to manage it. This is really important, taking away the grass cuttings, because it removes the big sort of ugly thatch of dried grass that can build up on our road verges, and also starts to reduce the nutrients, and that really allows the more delicate wildflowers to come through and a more resilient grassland to build up, and that's really important for storing carbon as well. And when you repeat collecting grass cuttings year on year, this helps to suppress the growth of the grass. So you have to cut less often, which is a win not only for time and budgets, but also for the carbon emissions from going out there and cutting. So they're the sort of foundation, if you like, for that. But there are steps that you could take beyond the sort of those steps, and how to work with what you've got already to make things more wildlife and carbon friendly. So that might be starting to enhance amenity grasslands, whether that's sort of amenity grassland verges or away from the road network, your green spaces as well, and starting to restore some of those not urban verges, sort of the open grassland verges that might comprise a lot of the networks that we have, and really to sort of bring back the biodiversity into the grasses. And the high diversity is really key when it comes to carbon storage rates in the soil as well. So some research that was looking at carbon storage between sort of agricultural fields and sort of abandoned grasslands and high diversity grasslands has shown that really restoring grasslands to high diversity can lead to carbon storage rates that are about 70% higher than compared to monocultures. And the presence of sort of more hardy species of wildflower that have longer roots and can get more into the soil, and legumes, so plants from the pea family that fix in nitrogen to the soil too. These can also be associated with higher soil carbon storage as well. And then also thinking about looking after what you've already got in terms of the best verges. So these might be your protected verge sites that are already rich in flowers, that already lock in quite a lot of carbon, and really keeping those in top condition is fantastic, not only for the wildlife, but for creating resilient ecosystems that are more resilient to climate change and the effects of that, and that only really need cutting once or twice a year at the moment based on the condition they're in. So that's really the good things to keep managing in good condition, and then ways that you can slowly start to restore the condition of other stretches of the network. And then the other thing, and it's been touched upon already today, there's the difference between sort of working with what we already have, and then also starting to change design principles and the way that we think about constructing, whether that's new roads or new developments, but also the verges that come with them as well. And there's huge potential in this, not only to create new species-rich, biodiverse road verges, but for there to be a huge amount of carbon savings and reduction in carbon emissions from this too. The sort of guiding principle around creating new species-rich verges is to avoid the use of fertile topsoil. High fertile topsoil sort of encourages the growth of the species that we don't really want to have to manage. The sort of thicker grasses, or sort of lots of sort of budding and things like that will come in on a sort of traditionally put together new verge, and that actually sort of reduces the success of the wildflowers that we want to encourage. So instead of finishing newly created verges or grassland with a thick layer of topsoil, sort of get rid of that and only finish it with minimal topsoil, or even better, sort of subsoil or a bare mineral substrate. And I know there are sort of concerns around this from the sort of landscaping point of view, that it won't look finished, or it won't sort of look very pretty for a new development. If you sow the sort of soil substrate with a sort of sand wildflower mix of species that can quickly establish, like kidney vetch and bird's foot trefoil and oxeye daisies, these can quickly establish, giving you sort of wonderful show on the side of the road, but as well as meaning that you need hardly any management to keep these verges under control. And the pictures I have on the slide here are of the Weymouth Relief Road, the wonderful project that was led by Dr. Phil Sterling from Butterfly Conservation. He's the go-to guy on creating new species-rich road verges with this low topsoil approach. And within a number of years, they've had wonderful sort of orchids, which is the bottom photo, and pyramidal orchids, as well as the kidney vetch really starting to develop, and hardly needing to manage it at all. And I know Phil and his colleagues and partners over at ADAS have been looking at the sort of calculations of the huge percentage reductions in carbon, not only from using less topsoil, but also from having to transport a whole lot less of soil around the sites from creation, and then of course having to cut a lot less because there isn't this sort of big overgrowth of grass that you get because there isn't the nutrients for it to grow in. And it was really exciting. Just before Christmas, Highways England announced a new low nutrient topsoil policy. So on all new major road schemes, which will be around 300 miles, I think, contractors are now being instructed to follow this new low nutrient grassland policy. Ben Hewlett is leading on this at Highways England, and in his words, it's another great example of how we're moving away simply from minimising the impact of our work on the environmental impacts towards actually improving the environment through our works. And scenes like this, which is down at the Weymouth Relief Road, can come from adopting this approach. And you might be thinking, oh, that's all very well on large road schemes or on rural verges, but what about verges in urban areas, or where you might, public perceptions of verges and the messiness of verges, and those complaints might be a problem. And sort of a few top tips to sort of help to counter that. Councils, there's often a perception that verges have to be long to be wildlife friendly, but they don't. You can create really short growing verges that are rich in species that are fantastic for pollinators, like your daisies and your clovers and birds foot trefoil and self-heal. But these verges are also, like, they grow really short. The finish is really neat. And by managing this on cut and collect, you only have to cut your like verges like this, urban verges. These are down in Weymouth. This is part of the Dorset Council project. You only have to cut them about 2 or 3 times a year, down from the sort of 12 times a year that you've been managing. So that can really help. Also, framing your verges. Sorry,
may I ask you to wrap up in about a minute?
Brilliant, I will do. Lovely. So yeah, framing your verges, not cutting all of it, but just cutting the front edge. That can really help in terms of keeping things safe, but perceptions as well. And then really working to communicate, engage of what's happening and what's changing with the regimes, and really building in this narrative of why this is so important to help tackle the climate emergency and the ecological emergency, as well as working on great enthusiasm that we're seeing from local residents for change as well. And yeah, don't be put off from starting somewhere. There's a whole of good work going on out there at the moment, from councils starting to adopt this and think about things differently, whether that's the management of the existing network or starting to change the way that we design new road schemes and sort of using less topsoil in that. So if you do have any questions on our guidelines, you can get those on our website, freely available to download, or whether you want to sort of get involved in NOMO May next year, please do get in touch with us. And it's fantastic to hear your case studies of what's happening on the ground, and we're more than happy to celebrate that too. So thank you very much, and I hope I haven't gone too much over time, but thank you.
No, in fact, you finished on time, if not a little bit early, Kate. That was fascinating. I can tell you my authority is running trials on verges to see how we can get wildflowers growing. And we've learned now that it's not about just stopping management of verges, it's just a different management approach. And we now know that we have to move the grass away. That's normally a cost-cutting exercise to leave the grass. But in fact, in the long term, it does more damage than good. So with that in mind, Kate, we know you have to leave us. Thank you very much for your presentation. And if anybody's got questions, you can send them to Kate later on. Thank you. I now like to invite Dr. Neil Jennings of Imperial College. And Neil is going to tell us about the co-benefits of decarbonising our transport. When you're ready, Neil. Thank you.
Many thanks, Parvis, and delighted to be here today. So yeah, my name's Neil Jennings. I work for the Grantham Institute, which is a climate change and environment research centre at Imperial College in London. And today I'll be touching on the climate emergency, so kind of zooming out, and then zooming into the opportunities that exist to be taking action on the climate emergency while achieving co-benefits for other challenges that we're facing as a society, and with a particular focus on the role for transport decarbonisation. So just to, again, as I say, kind of start by zooming out in terms of where we're at in terms of global climate. So many of you will be aware that when we refer to the kind of changes that we've seen in global temperatures, we often refer as the kind of a baseline to the pre-industrial era. So relative to that baseline from around 1850, we've already had approximately 1.2 degrees of global temperature rise. Back in 2015 in Paris, all the countries of the world came together and signed an agreement that aimed to keep global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius, and to pursue efforts to try and limit that temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And these values can often appear quite abstract, so I'll give an indication of what these things kind of mean in practice for our day-to-day lives in a minute. But also from the agreement in Paris, countries of the world set in place what are called nationally determined contributions, where they kind of laid out their expected emissions of greenhouse gases in the next period. And on the basis of those pledges, we're on course for over 3 degree rise in global temperatures by the end of this century. So we're well off course at the moment to avoiding the worst consequences of climate change. So just to then kind of go in as to what that 2 degrees Celsius and 1.5 degrees Celsius, what those kind of temperatures mean in practice. So 3 years ago now, in October 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published a report around 1.5 degrees. So it looked at all the evidence from across the scientific literature of what a world looks like where we've increased global temperatures to 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels, or where we've reached a 2-degree rise in temperatures relative to pre-industrial levels. And the key conclusion they came to was that every fraction of a degree matters in terms of the impact that we have upon our natural world and upon societies, but that we still have time to limit warming to that 1.5 degree threshold. So I'll give a couple of specific examples. The first from the natural world to kind of say and give an example of what the difference is between those thresholds. So if we allow global temperatures to increase to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, then warm water coral reefs, such as in the Great Barrier Reef, will look like the picture here. They will be gone in terms of the biodiversity of life. They will be bleached via a combination of the increased heat, but also because of the acidification of the oceans from carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolving into the oceans. They will look like this. So one of the kind of most beautiful, pristine habitats that we have in our world will be gone as we know it. And even at that 1.5 degree threshold, it's still very significant in terms of the impact that we have upon warm water coral reefs. So at 1.5 degrees, only 10 to 30% of warm water coral reefs around the world will remain. So quite stark for that particular part of our natural world. And let's go to kind of an example from the impact that these different temperature thresholds will have upon societies. So many of you will remember that 3 years ago, we had a really warm summer. At the time, that was a record equaling summer. It was the joint hottest summer we'd ever had in the UK. So if global temperatures reached that 1.5 degree threshold, that summer, which was record equaling at the time, which caused an incredible amount of disruption to our transport systems, that summer in a 1.5 degree rise scenario will occur on average once every 4 years. If we reach the 2 degree threshold, then that summer will be an average summer. It will occur every other year, once in every 2 years. And it's worth saying as well, in terms of the rate of change, that at the moment, global temperatures are increasing by 0.2 degrees per decade. So in the current trajectory, we will hit that 1.5 degree threshold within the next 20 or so years, and that 2 degree rise will hit within the next 50 years. And obviously that's for many infrastructure projects. Those are very relevant timescales for us to be considering how we are both taking action to avoid those temperature changes by doing what we can to mitigate emissions, but also in terms of adapting to a warmer climate as well. And many of you may have seen in the news last week, the Climate Change Committee published a very comprehensive report on climate change adaptation in the UK, and came to the conclusion that the UK is very much struggling to keep pace with climate change impacts, that we are unprepared for the future climate that we are on the trajectory to inherit, and that a lot more needs to be done across a whole variety of different sectors of the economy in order to adapt to these warmer temperatures that we are likely to see. And so there's obviously a very key kind of challenge to both mitigate emissions while also thinking about the way in which we're implementing actions can also help to adapt to a warmer climate as well. And that's why things like nature-based solutions, like things like tree planting, are kind of good for both of those areas, for mitigating emissions, for drawing down carbon dioxide while also adapting to a warmer climate as well. So I'll just kind of then move on to the kind of transport side of stuff. And so this graph here shows the emissions from different sectors of our economy over the last 30 years. So going back to 1990 on the left through to pretty much present day on the right-hand side. And it shows the emissions from different sectors of our economy and how that's changed over time. So you can see some real success in things like the power sector, thanks to growth of renewables and the reduction of fossil fuels, particularly coal. But we can also see that some sectors have remained static or indeed have actually slightly increased. And surface transport is one of them that has actually increased slightly since 1990 to the point now that it is the highest emitting sector of the UK economy. So a lot more progress is required within the surface transport sector in particular. And I guess the next kind of phase of decarbonisation, to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, such as that 1.5 degree threshold, we know we need to roughly halve emissions of greenhouse gases across the globe within the next 10 or so years. And that clearly poses a significant challenge in terms of the potential disruption and also the potential impact it has on people's day-to-day lives. So the kind of images here kind of trying to illustrate the challenges of following the science and ensuring that we are decarbonising as groups such as Extinction Rebellion are calling for, while also making sure that we take the public with us to avoid situations as depicted on the right-hand side here. And this is a photo before lockdown from the Gilets Jaunes in Paris. So people protesting against, in that case, attacks on fuel. So a real key challenge is how we take the public with us in this next phase of what needs to be quite rapid decarbonisation. And for me, there's kind of two key questions that we need to be asking in terms of how we take the public with us on this next phase. And the first question is, what gets people out of bed in the morning? So what is the positive vision of a future that people want to be part of? And for that, I've kind of chosen this image on the left-hand side here of kind of safer streets where people were able to walk and cycle and interact more than they were before, that aren't so dependent upon cars as the primary form of transport. And then the second question I think we need to really keep front and center of our minds is what keeps people awake at night. And the image on the right here is from Plymouth, which can suffer from relatively high levels of air pollution. And so that's the question here, is kind of getting at what are the other key issues that people are facing in their day-to-day lives, and how might action on climate change be able to help to address some of these other key challenges, such as the challenges around air pollution, and I'll come on to some others in a minute. So with this in mind, myself and some colleagues did some work on what we call co-benefits of climate action. So that's where actions that help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions can also have significant benefits for tackling many of the other key challenges that we're facing as a society. So myself and some colleagues wrote a kind of a briefing paper looking at all the academic literature, what it says about the synergies that exist between what's good for climate change action and what's good for other key challenges. And we teamed up with a great charity called Ashton, who put together this toolkit, which if you haven't seen it already, I really recommend you have a look. It's a toolkit with loads of case studies from local authorities all over the country about ways in which they've used resources strategically to tackle multiple issues all at once, to help to create this kind of positive vision of a low carbon society for their local area. And I'll give this kind of graph as an illustration of where we started from in the work that we did with the briefing paper, which was kind of depicted on that left-hand side there. So we looked at public opinion data. So kind of answering that question of what keeps people awake at night, we looked at data from Ipsos Mori. And so this is a polling organisation, and they ask a question of the representative sample of the UK public once a month, asking the question, what issue are you most concerned about? And this graph here shows how the kind of level of concern has changed over the last 14 or so years. So you can see going from 2007 on the left through to 2021 on the right, and on the y-axis you've got the different percentages of the public who are raising particular issues of concern, and people could raise more than one issue, obviously whatever was on their mind at the time. And so you can see in the kind of green line there, following the economic crash of 2008, we've got a high level of concern with the economy. You've got the orange line, which is this gradually increasing level of concern with health, their own personal health, and the NHS and how that's going. You've got the concern in grey here around Brexit and the EU. And then the other line I'd kind of draw your attention to is this dotted line, which is the proportion of the population who are concerned with pollution or the environment. And so what you'll see here is that for a large proportion of the time, it figured relatively low down the list of priorities. So I guess that kind of illustrates the need for us, bearing in mind we know we need to take a lot more action on climate change, the need to try and link in action on climate change with some of these other issues that people that are more day-to-day concerns for people. The other thing as well you'll see is this kind of gradual increase in levels of concern, to the point that actually just before the lockdown in February 2020, pollution of the environment was the third highest issue of concern amongst the UK public. So right up there with, at that time, with health and with immigration and the common market, and sorry, Brexit at that particular time. And so I guess at this point is getting at the need to kind of link climate action with other key challenges that we're facing as a society as well. And so our kind of analysis of all the academic literature drew on and kind of pulled out these key areas which we see as being the really kind of key co-benefits which have the opportunity to engage with the public. That's particularly around the opportunities for improving people's health by taking action on climate change, opportunities around improving the economy through job creation, through reducing unemployment, around simultaneously focusing on ways in which we can tackle inequalities in society and poverty, and also around energy security, about the way in which as we move as a society away from reliance upon imported oil and gas, so we can become more energy secure as a society through particularly the growth of renewables and also improvements in energy efficiency as well. And I'll give an example now of what this kind of means, particularly on the health side of things, in the context of action in the transport sector. Just to show first a quick illustration of some of the things which we've come to know from the health community over the last few years. And so some colleagues from Imperial were involved in an international study that looked at all the evidence around air quality or poor air quality and the impact that has upon our bodies. And the key conclusion that they came to was that every single organ of our body is negatively affected by poor air quality, by air pollution. So whether that's dementia, Parkinson's, stroke, heart disease, various forms of cancer, down to things like acne and obvious stuff like asthma, every single organ of our body is negatively affected by poor air quality. But what's also good for action on climate change in terms of helping to improve air quality can also be really good for helping to improve public health as well. This is kind of an example from the transport sector, where we know at the moment that in many of our towns and cities, we have relatively high levels of nitrous oxides and particulate matter, particularly in urban areas. And in the UK, the Royal College of Physicians estimate there's around 40,000 deaths a year attributable to poor air quality in the UK. It's linked to a whole variety of illnesses, as illustrated from the last slide, and that has significant impacts on costs for the NHS. We also know there's a really important element of inequality in this as well, in that it's our poorest communities who are most exposed to the highest levels of air pollution in the country. And so we also know the impacts that poor air quality can have on young people's health in particular. So via the impact on things like asthma, that can increase the chance of young people missing days of school, which inevitably has a negative impact upon their educational attainment or their ability to participate in things like PE and stuff like that, and the kind of knock-on effect that has on things like obesity rates as well. So negative impacts of air quality can also have a kind of impact from parents as well, whether that's them having to stay home to look after their kids or actually missing days of work themselves because they're being made ill by poor air quality. And all these things have a negative impact upon our economy, upon the productivity of our workforce. We're sending people to work who are ill because of having to breathe poor air. And it's estimated from the World Health Organization that premature deaths in the UK cost the economy around £54 billion a year, so very significant. So where are the opportunities here to break some of this vicious cycle that currently exists at the moment? Well, there's real opportunities in the transport sector, particularly via some of the things which we've heard about already over this series of talks around the electrification of vehicles, but also particularly the move towards more public transport and more active forms of transport as well, more walking and more cycling. That can help to reduce levels of pollution in urban areas particularly, help to reduce the number of deaths per year, reduce costs for our health service, positively benefit poorer communities in particular, because those are the ones who are most exposed to highest levels of air pollution, mean that our kids can breathe cleaner air, less likely to miss days of school, improve educational outcomes, people can miss a few days of work, improve productivity for our workforce, lower costs to our economy, while also bringing significant benefits around opportunities for the way in which electric vehicles can be used for balancing the grid as well, and public health benefits associated with active transport from, as I mentioned, things like reducing obesity rates, which we know is another big challenge we're facing in our country as well. And so that kind of paints a rosy picture of some of the opportunities that exist around some of these co-benefits, but there are barriers that also exist to take advantage of them. And particularly that, I think, is there in the way in which there are often split incentives as to who pays and who benefits for some of these interventions. So in many cases, things like low traffic neighbourhoods, which have been getting a lot of publicity over the last few months, they're often paid for by transport teams. But the benefits, if you like, that those initiatives bring for improving air quality and for public health, those benefits will be accrued by the local NHS trust. So there's a challenge there in terms of who benefits and who pays, and opportunities that also exist for greater collaboration I think, between different sectors in order to try and bring these who pays and who benefits closer together. There's a really nice example in this. It's an article from The Guardian a few weeks ago of a hospital in London where the hospital charity from Guy's and St Thomas's have teamed up with their local councils, Lambeth and Southwark, and so they've paid £250,000 for the council to install a low traffic neighbourhood there, knowing that, and they focus specifically on installing that in an area of high social deprivation with high levels of obesity and high levels of air pollution. And so they've funded that because they know that that will help to achieve savings in their bottom line for health-related referrals as well. So really nice collaboration as a kind of example there, which I think we need to see a lot more of, particularly given the speed with which we need to take action on climate change. And another area in which there may be potential solutions is around greater devolution, which we've seen in a number of with a number of metro mayors. And so up in Manchester, where Andy Burnham has had the £6 billion health and social care budget devolved to him, there are great opportunities there within the Greater Manchester Authority for kind of cross-disciplinary working, if you like, where the health teams can be working more closely with the transport teams because they're in the same room, whereas before they maybe weren't, and there was separate budgets, whereas now there's more opportunities for alignment of the way in which money is spent and work is prioritised. And I'll just give a quick example of some of the co-benefits that these low traffic neighbourhoods in this case can bring with a case study from Waltham Forest. So in this case, they implemented some of the things you can see in the picture here: pocket parks, one-way roads, improved cycle infrastructure. And so in total, there was 24 kilometres of cycleways went in, 15,000 local adults and children were given cycle training. And as a result of the physical infrastructure and the community engagement, residents living in that area now are walking an average of 41 extra minutes, walking or cycling an extra 41 minutes a week. And so over the kind of 10 years from 2007 to 2017, they've gone from having 56,000 households with illegal levels of nitrogen dioxide, largely because of the pollution coming from the roads, down to 6,000, so almost a 90% reduction. So in this case, this highways intervention has reduced air pollution, and a study from King's College London found that children born in that area are now likely to live an average of 6 weeks longer than they were before the intervention. And they also found that this, while there was a small increase in traffic on some of the surrounding main roads, there was no discernible increase in air pollution as well. And there's a study which just come out from the British Medical Journal, which looked at the kind of some of the kind of longer term impacts that this had on communities living in the area where they had this low traffic neighbourhood, and basically found that car and van ownership had decreased by 7%, and there'd been no increase in emergency service response times. A somewhat surprising outcome had been an 18% reduction in street crime because of the perception of safer streets, and there's also a 3/4 reduction in the risk of being injured in a road traffic collision as well. And they found that there'd been no negative knock-on impact on the boundary roads surrounding the area as well. So a really nice example of kind of a transport intervention, good for climate change in terms of shifting people out of driving so much, good for air pollution, good for the kids living in the area in terms of the air that they breathe, and then also reductions in street crime and of road traffic accidents as well. And so just to kind of come to kind of an end, like I guess to kind of emphasize, we've got quite a big challenge in front of us in terms of the speed with which we need to decarbonize. We really need to have in the back of our minds this positive vision of the future that helps to bring the public with us. And for those of you on Twitter, I highly recommend you follow this guy called Brent Tederian. And so he often posts on the kind of like the impacts that some of these transport interventions have had. And this is a photo that he posted from Amsterdam, saying, remember this picture every single time you hear someone in your city say, we're not Amsterdam. This is Amsterdam in the 1970s, where they had massive problems with road transport and with air pollution. And they made a decision to shift the focus back towards more walking and more cycling in that particular area. And now there's a situation where 38% of journeys in Amsterdam are done by bike, and that's compared to say something like London, where it's 2%. So we should not be constrained by where we are now in terms of envisaging the future that we can potentially move into. And just to kind of wrap up with a few concluding remarks, so hopefully from the first part of the presentation I've kind of outlined the urgent need we have for action on climate change, both in mitigation and also in adapting to a warmer climate. It's fair to say that over the last 30 years, the transport sector has lagged behind other sectors in terms of action on climate change, but I think there are really exciting opportunities for decarbonising the transport sector that can also bring significant co-benefits that make a significant difference to the day-to-day quality of people's lives. So I'll finish off there. My contact details are there, and thanks very much, and great to be here again.
Thank you, Neil. That was fascinating, very good. And I just add to your last slide regarding Amsterdam's comparison with London is that, because I've been in that discussion many times, and I've checked, and it rains 50% more in Amsterdam per year than it does in London, because people pull up the weather argument every time, don't they? But it rains 50% more there. So it's quite interesting. But that was very good. If I can ask other speakers to join us. Barry, welcome back. We've got some questions for you. I actually like to follow up Neil's presentation, but just asking his opinion on, for me as a practitioner, the biggest barrier for me for getting people out of their cars and getting them to walk and cycle is not funding. It's not means of doing it. It's not ideas. We've got plenty of ideas. It's the culture of not wanting to give up the short journeys being done by cars. That is by far the biggest problem I've got. So is anything being done to change that? Because I don't feel we're going anywhere until there's more, not stigmatizing, but there's more shift in public opinion towards active travel.
Yeah. I mean, I can entirely agree with the point you raised in terms of the nature of the challenge. I think the more we've come to realise over the last few years about the impacts that poor air quality has on people's health, I think the stronger the health argument has become. Having said that, when it comes down to the element of convenience and the choice to jump in a car versus to walk or cycle, that still doesn't necessarily, that element of awareness or concern about the particular impact doesn't necessarily outweigh things. And I think a lot of the key challenges that exist around this are embedded habits, which can be incredibly difficult to break. And that's why I think that there's no one thing that needs, and it maybe links to some of the questions in the last Q&A, there's no one thing that needs to happen. We need so many things to happen simultaneously. And so that is for the right infrastructure to be there to remove some of those excuses, if you like, or reasons that people wouldn't do things. So for example, for cycling, we know that the perception of safety can be a really important barrier to people adopting these changes. And so one of the kind of theories which I really like from the kind of academic side of something of the work is something called the habit discontinuity hypothesis, which is a long-winded way of saying that at key moments in people's lives when they're undergoing change, they're much more likely to consider adopting other changes in their day-to-day lives as well. So I think, and so an example of that is around women who are expecting a child. That's often a key intervention point for the NHS to try and promote quitting smoking, for example. And so they can other key times, maybe starting a new job or when your kids start school and moving house and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot more that can be done around targeting interventions at those particular moments in time, and that can help to increase the chance that people are more receptive to making some of these changes. But of course, there's a whole range of things that need to happen, both in terms of the infrastructure, both in terms of the right incentives, and also the kind of the societal stuff as well about people change when people see other people changing as well. So I think we all have something to do in terms of talking about the positive changes that we've made in our own lives to maximize the chance that other people will consider changing their own habits and behaviors as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Neil. Thanks for sharing your opinion. Barry, I've got the next question for you. Diane Ware really likes the idea of the turbines. She's asking regarding the need to assess the strength of the columns in terms of connection. I recall that you sort of mentioned that not all columns are suitable, but can you just give us an overview of how you go about deciding where it can be used?
So we know the lateral load that takes place on the turbine at different wind speeds, but for the most part, we're moving air around the column with the rotational aspect. That being said, some of the columns we've come across are 80 years old, and their foundations aren't too deep. So it's less about the column, but more about the gauge of cabling. And as we've seen, the more recent cabling that we have for lighting columns in this country is much more capable of taking higher loads with regards to electricity. So our biggest issue is actually the cable and not necessarily the column itself.
Thank you. And the follow-up question to that, Barry, I've got from Emma, which is a question I had when I was listening to your presentation, is that can the units work with normal wind? And has that been considered?
They do. That being said, we don't get as much because we don't have the dual airflow impact, so the efficiency is less. But we do have a product that is going on to a number of sites, which is 2.5 meters in diameter, which counteracts that. So we use the same principle as a larger horizontal axis wind turbine, which is by increasing the swept area. But that's more suited to industrial units, distribution centers, mainly industrial plants.
Okay, thank you for that. One more question on the turbines. You mentioned, that the experiment you're doing is creating 9 megawatts, I think you said, per day. How much is that in terms of powering residential areas, or how many houses does that feed? To give us a scale of
9 megawatts. It's around 60,000 homes can be powered by 9 megawatts per day.
Wow.
The average UK home is around 8 to 10 kilowatt hours per day.
Okay, quite significant then. Okay, thank you for that. Yes. I don't have any other questions to ask you. I'd just like to thank you both for your presentations. They were really fascinating to listen to. This brings us to the end of the seminar today. I'd like to thank all the delegates for participating today. I'd like to thank Emma Cockburn and Mark Luker especially for planning and running the show in the background today. This event was only possible thanks to the support of our sponsors, Atkins, and also other supporters, WDM, Pay by Phone, and Southwest Highways. Please do visit the exhibitors' booths, which will remain open until 9 p.m. To allow you to browse information in your own time. And of course, this will be replayed on Hopin at 6:30 this evening. So once again, thank you to all the speakers, thank you to all the delegates, and I hope to see you all soon. All the best. Thank you very much.